This talk is about digital humanities in education, new trends for teaching languages, literatures and cultures. Education digitally globalized in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and this will have consequences for the future in teaching languages, literatures and cultures, as well as for the future of all knowledge disciplines. In this same year, I took on the chair of Digital Humanities in Education of the International Council for Philosophy and Human Sciences of UNESCO. It is therefore the right time to promote the creation of privileged network spaces that allow the development of digital projects for education at all levels. We cannot fail to take advantage of the opportunity that the world of today offers us to create true institutional partnerships so that it is possible to connect tools, research, projects, courses, studies, and agents that explore the potential of digital resources. We must create collaborative work within interdisciplinary structures to promote teacher training, international educational networks, and research projects that value digital education as a means of facing today's global challenges and sustainable development. In this presentation, I will try to connect the best digital resources and policies available today for teaching languages, literatures and cultures and contribute to better access to new forms of learning and teaching. The OECD Future of Education and Skills 2020 seeks to systematize the skills, attitudes and values that students from all over the world must acquire by 2030. The OECD Learning Compass is already a widely disseminated map that helps to read all these elements in an overview which should serve as an anchor for the definition of major teaching objectives. The fact that this learning compass serves as a guide for the student's self-knowledge in situations in which he or she will evolve in his or her training process presupposes a path of self-disclosure that seems to me fundamental. Digital education should fit here as one of the tools that will allow greater effortlessness and skill to achieve this self-knowledge. If we are to change the traditional paradigms of languages, literatures and cultures teaching, we should focus our attention to the possibilities offered by self-knowledge and self-training through digital education. Let us not devalue the creative capacity of the new generation of digital teachers and students. The examples of revolution in the classroom that the manual Being a Child in the Age of Technology offers us are a good example of this ability to transform traditional teaching into something more technological, attractive, with added pedagogical value. This is the case of this website called Web We Want, which looks like this. And they say, just as the Web We Want was developed by young people for young people, the lessons in the Web We Want handbook for educators have been designed by teachers for teachers across Europe and beyond. The lesson plans propose ideas and activities to encourage young people to develop the creative and critical thinking skills essential for a fulfilled life in the world of tomorrow. This very important project, in my view, brings us suggestions for classes aligned with the European e-competence framework organized in a very clear planning table, as we can see here. Whether for teaching languages or teaching literary and culture content, there is a starting point here for any teaching planning, which seems to me to be vital. There is a detail to highlight. The project was born from young people to young people, because we have to accept that the national curriculum can no longer be designed by adults only without having in mind what young people expect it to contain. Another project, Imagination.org, inspired by a 9-year-old American child, is another example of digital creativity that young people can help us bring to the classroom with enormous educational gain. Telling extraordinary creativity stories of children from around the world, as proposed by this project, and I quote, "The mission of Imagination.org is to find, foster and fund creativity and entrepreneurship in children around the world to raise a new generation of innovators and problem solvers who have the tools they need to build the world they imagine." End of quote. This has to be a major design of any language class, L1 or L2. Digital is not a barrier to linguistic creativity or literary imagination. On the contrary, it can contribute to an expansion of the capacity for invention. Linguistic Computing Center under the chairman of Roy Wisbley, this is where we have started. In literary studies or in linguistic studies as well. We started indeed the computerized study of literature by, as you probably remember, building concordances and thesauri of classic texts. In the 80s, the first Association for Computers and Humanities emerged, and the first international conferences on the interaction of computers and texts were organized even before the birth of the World Wide Web in the early 90s. Google was born in 1998, if I may recall, and our scientific and literary modus operandi will change forever from there. And in 2004, Blackwell Companion to Digital Humanities helped to establish the expression digital humanities as a globally accepted concept. The digital landscape that we see around us today is priceless, and it is irreversible. Nothing in this world goes back. Digital humanities are always forward-looking and constantly evolving. Our capacity for scientific work either follows this frantic evolution, or we will be left behind and quickly leave this landscape. We should neither be surprised nor afraid of dialogue with the computer sciences and with all sciences that have a more technological knowledge base than the humanities. In other words, the language teacher today is not just a teacher of linguistic communication. He is obliged to know all the ways in which this communication takes place through technology, and that affects the quality of learning. The professor of literature and culture may lock himself or herself in any dematerialized convent of digital resources, but he will lose sight of all that can be learned today on a writer's website, on an interactive maps of a particular culture, on forms of communication and digital research that allow us to go further and to places that are physically impossible to reach, or to perceive the networks of hyperlinks that any literary work can offer us. The researcher in these areas and in all others has also changed the way he works with quantitative and qualitative data, having today digital tools that make this job easier and that make it more and more complex. Technological advances positively affect humanities, which we traditionally associate more timidly with the digital world. In an era not too distant, researching recurrent themes in a literary work required the consultation of concordances, rare in Portuguese critical context, I must add, or the exhaustive and repeated reading of that work. We have evolved in such a way that today we reduce that working time from many days to 1 second, which is the time it takes to know how many times a key term appears in a digitalized work in Word or in a PDF. Our physical libraries have not lost value, but they cannot compete with digital libraries in databases where we find entire bibliographies for our literary, linguistic, or culture investigations. From the invention of the typewriter in 1868 to today's computers and word processors, let us think of the gigantic evolution that we have made in such a short time in the history of mankind. We can also reflect on the scale that goes from the launch of the first Microsoft Office for Windows in 1990 to the current Office 369. With Office 369, today we build bibliographic databases, complex indexes, we use spell checkers, we integrate word processing with images, audio and video, we integrate our written research in digital library organizers, etc. In short, we have become typewriters ourselves, without this signifying a form of loss of power over writing. On the contrary, we write better, with better presentation skills and resources, with greater orthographic and graphic rigor, and with greater rigor in scientific discourse. The digital humanities are also just that, the acquisition of an extraordinary capacity to digitize writing, scientific and literary, formal and informal. And to understand well what we have achieved, we have to review where we started. In literary studies, which is my main field of research, for example, the pioneers of digital humanities are researchers at the University of Cambridge. In 1964, they created the literary and literature today, which is no longer a simple and asynchronous interaction between the writer and the reader. The digital humanities have allowed that interaction today to be synchronous, collaborative, interactive, and interdisciplinary. Today's author can write and edit his own book, promote it on all social networks, and even collect dividends from these sales directly in his personal account. The reception of the work of art is now immediate, global, and without language control. Literary genres now include computer-generated literature, fan fiction, cold work fiction, flash poetry, block fiction, hypertext fiction, etc. The concept of literary criticism has been updated as well. There is more literary criticism published on the websites of major world publishers in the form of comments from their readers or users, not necessarily both at the same time, than criticism published in the traditional media. Social media can change, and the fate of a literary work or an author, for better or for worse. Necessarily, the general public understanding of a literary work has also become less scientific because of the demand for an immediate return of literary taste that we can reduce to a simple emoji. In fact, an emoji is worth more today than an adjective in many contexts of interpersonal communication. This affects the entire apparatus of literary and linguistic communication, even from the pedagogical point of view. I'm sure that more easily a student of basic education in any country will use more emojis than adjectives in his communication with others, whatever the context. This forces changes in the literary and linguistic education of our young people. Digital education is a complement to literary and linguistic education, and today's student must realize this. Many of today's students have already assumed that their digital communication processes are the very foundation of interpersonal communication, and look at that formal learning of grammar and the formal uses of languages that speak as secondary basis of communication. My generation learned the opposite. Digital education must come after language education and is consolidated in the first years of schooling. They can be simultaneous, of course, but educators must have a very solid training to be able to manage discursive priorities in communication. We got used to looking at Finland as a country at the front end of education. After its success in this century, while it took the top spot in the International Student Assessment Program, known as PISA, the country experienced a moderate setback in terms of comparison with the more developed countries, and now it wants to resume the path of innovation by proposing a new approach, total teaching revolution. The project is called Phenomenal Education. It is of a constructivist inspiration, and it is based on teaching oriented towards phenomena in a free translation. The paradigm shift depends on the assimilation of digital education capable of replacing traditional education. The theoretical assumptions of this new revolution are almost undisputable, as we can read in this post. And I quote, "Our society and business life are highly digital, but the educational institutions are only just taking the first steps in becoming digital." And they keep on justifying quite well, quite correctly, this digital revolution they want to implement in Finland nowadays. Well, the curriculum design is like this. And the curriculum design in a phenomenological system like this, that Finland is preparing for the future of its education system, has a disadvantage from the outset, which we have known since the beginning of the 20th century in philosophy, the phenomenology of Edmund Husserl. A phenomenological method or approach is by definition a method of showing phenomena, leaving little or no scope for exercises of subjectivity and creativity in the interpretation of these phenomena, which can lead to a type of education that is, I would say, too robotic. For me, it is still more interesting to discover the intimate meaning of things from the point of view of our poet Albert Campus, and I quote from Albert Campus, "The only intimate meaning of things, it is that they have no intimate meaning at all." Then this is probably a better principle than the one that is proposed here from this phenomenological approach, from this the more and even from the more scientific view of Husserl that forces us to look at things in their pure meaning as they are revealed to us consciously. This process is oriented towards the student's curiosity, and if this is possible, that curiosity turns into creativity and free thought, then we can positively concretize the phenomenological model. The near future will tell us whether this model is going to be globalized again, which may be easier to do than we think due to its strong digital component. Institutional assessment of the uses of information and communication technologies should be on both the budget agendas and the scientific agendas of schools and universities. If Finland has already found an innovative strategic path and its effectiveness is demonstrated by the results of the next PISA exams, the example will certainly multiply even in this decade. It is important to promote and develop the acquisition of digital skills, no doubt about it. But it is no less important to know, systematize and investigate the nature and effectiveness of that acquisition. European Commission project like the Selfie is a good example of what we also need to add to our technological development programs in humanities. The promoting of this project towards an effective digital age learning program is very important, and you can move from Selfie to DIGCOM 2.0, and this has been in existence for 5 years, this project. Another good example of one possible way through digital education for the next decade. This is another core document for the scientific support of national programs. This is called the Digital Competence Framework 2.0. This was published in 2016. In humanities, it seems to me that they have been almost ignored and, however, should be in the same order of priorities as our widely known Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. These reference documents should be articulated, in my view. Today, we cannot define essential skills for language learning, for example, without looking at digital skills. We cannot complain about good European policies for humanities and for education in general. Educational programmers knew how to follow the good proposals. We have yet another important new agenda called Digital Education Action Plan until 2027, and the new European plan has 2 pillars: fostering the development of a high-performing digital education ecosystem and enhancing digital skills and competencies for the digital transformation. This European agenda for the development of digital education in all the strategic lines identified here by the European Commission will have to affect the future of digital humanities and their teaching. Whether the creation of a European Digital Education Hub, the update of DIGCOM 2.0, the creation of a European Digital Skills Certificate, or the strengthening of teacher training in the field of digital education, this European plan should be the plan for all schools. Digital education is no longer the future. It is already this troubled present that we live in and that we all learn daily in levels of overcoming never experienced before. It is not a panacea for all the problems we know, but it is a path that will help us to build better teaching of languages, literatures and cultures of all nationalities. And this, and I will end saying that this plurality and interdisciplinary in the field of languages, literature and cultures has never been as effective as it is today. And this is due to the ability we had to digitally approach each other. In humanities, we have the great advantage of knowing and being able to give examples of how to humanize these questions. No other area of knowledge can do it better than we do. Thank you.